Hey guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be going through my top tips to help you ace your ethical scenarios and ensure that you answer the questions in the best way possible. Before I get into the rest of the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and smash that notification bell to stay up to date with all my videos. So I think I'm going to try and make this a series where I go over all the different styles of questions that can come up in interviews. I thought I'd start off with ethical scenarios because it's the most common question I get asked, questions about. So I really hope you guys find this video useful. And if you have any feedback or anything that you'd like me to change up, please do let me know in the comments down below or just drop me a DM on Instagram. So very quickly, I'll just explain what an ethical scenario is. So in an ethical scenario, you'll be given a complex situation where you have to weigh up many different ethical factors. There's 4 specific ethical principles that you're going to have to represent when you're answering the question. These 4 things are autonomy, justice, non-maleficence, and beneficence. Just to give you guys a very quick definition about these 4 different principles, when it comes to non-maleficence, we're basically saying we want to do nothing bad to the patient, non-maleficence, so malice is, bad. Beneficence means doing a treatment that is the best for the patient, so providing the best service for the patient. The next one is justice, and justice relates to treating every single patient equally and fairly. Now, you might be thinking this is a really obvious one. However, a lot of people mess this up in the interview. For example, they may be given a scenario where they're told you have to decide treatment before, a very heavy drug user or a pregnant woman. And instantly they think, well, we should be giving it to the pregnant woman because she's more at risk, and that the drug user doesn't really care about their health. However, this is the wrong way of thinking. This is because you need to evaluate the reasons for treating the heavy drug user and the reasons for treating the pregnant woman. So you shouldn't just be saying, well, they're a heavy drug user, so obviously they shouldn't get treatment over someone else, because this is not adhering to the ethical principles of justice. The last ethical principle is autonomy. Now, this relates to a person being able to make their own decision regardless of your clinical opinion. So let's say you're in a situation where you want to provide treatment to a patient, but they are refusing that treatment. Even if you think they have to get this treatment to survive, if the patient says no, you just have to respect their autonomy and move on with it. This is a very key thing that a lot of people need to grasp when it comes to dealing with ethical scenarios, because it's very commonly misrepresented. So now I've given you a bit of a description about the 4 ethical principles. Let me go through the things you should be looking for when you're trying to answer an ethical scenario. So the first thing I'd say is to make sure that you evaluate the ethical scenario. And this means that you should be looking at multiple dimensions when it comes to the scenario. This might sound a bit weird. However, what I'm basically saying is you shouldn't be jumping to conclusions. You really need to consider every angle when it comes to the scenario and all the people involved in the decisions that you make. For example, let's look at the previous scenario I mentioned, where I said we may have a person that is a heavy drug user and a pregnant woman who both need the same treatment. However, you can only treat one. Now, instantly in your head, you might be thinking, well, the pregnant woman takes priority. However, this is the wrong way of thinking. You really need to think and evaluate why you should treat the pregnant woman and why you should treat the heavy drug user. There's a load of factors that you need to take into account before making a final decision. You can't just say, well, this person's a heavy drug user, so they should be put on the bottom of the list, because that is the wrong way of thinking. Evaluate and independently assess the different parts of the scenario before making a decision as to how you want to present your argument. My second tip is to take a second before answering. One common thing that people do that really messes up their ethical scenarios is that they try and jump head first. As I said, a lot of the time you'll read the scenario and think it's very clear cut. However, that means that you just haven't really understood the scenario in front of you. 99% of the time, you'll be given a very complex scenario that requires a lot of thinking and application of knowledge. So don't try and jump right into it. Taking a second to collect your thoughts is not only good practice for ethical scenario questions, but a good practice in general when you're answering interview questions. It allows you to gather your thoughts before making a judgment or making a decision on how you want to answer the question. So that's something I would really encourage. Don't think because you're taking a second to think the interviewer is going to penalize you. They'll understand that you need a second to think before you make a viable answer. And this actually shows a level of professionalism and understanding that this is a complex ethical scenario. My next tip is that you need to understand that there is no one correct answer. The whole point of this question, the whole point of these ethical scenarios is to evaluate how you think. The interview is assessing your ability to assess the scenario and take into account all the complex situations. There isn't a clear-cut correct answer that the interviewer has written down that you need to cover, but rather certain things they want you to mention or comment on that show that you truly understand the scenario. This is why I said you should take a second to think before you answer the scenario, because the interviewer isn't looking for one specific answer, they're looking for many elements of an answer that show that you have a true understanding. So really do make sure that you evaluate all the different aspects of the ethical scenario and take into account every single person that has been mentioned. Leading on from this, you really need to make sure you don't introduce any personal biases. The problem with introducing personal bias is that it makes you seem less professional, and it also shows that you haven't really processed the ethical scenario correctly. There should be no personal bias when you're answering these questions. You should just be using the information that has been given to you. Don't call on any personal examples or any independent biases that you may have. Just approach the scenario neutrally and make sure you make a balanced argument. Don't try and weigh one element over another. Try and equally debate every point. Even if it goes completely against your personal biases, you need to remain neutral when you're answering these questions. And my next tip is to make sure you don't get overly emotional. Now, some people think that in order to tell the argument more and make it seem that you really take into account the scenario, you need to be very hyper emotional. But this isn't really the best way to take it about. As I said, neutrality is the key thing when it comes to these scenarios, and being over emotional destroys this. So you need to make sure that you're calm, collected, and clear when it comes to answering these questions. As well as thinking about what you're going to say, you need to think about how you're going to say it. You need to make sure that you speak articulately and clearly to ensure the interviewer understands everything that you're saying. And in doing so, it really helps you formulate your answers and sound more professional in the interview. So now that I've gone through these top tips, I'm going to go through an ethical scenario and explain how I would answer the question. So the ethical scenario is a 7-year-old child has come into your practice and has multiple carious lesions. You are saying that this child needs 5 fillings. However, the mother refuses and says that her child needs no fillings, and she's saying that you're trying to scam her out of money. What would you do in this situation? Feel free to pause this video and try and answer this scenario yourself. You can then compare your answer to mine. So the first thing you need to understand is that you can't be annoyed at the mother for having this opinion. Instead, you should be trying to find out why the mother is so upset about you doing these fillings. She may have had a bad experience in the past with another dentist, or she may just think that these fillings are unnecessary because she's seen them fail in her own restorations. Your job isn't to disprove the mother, but rather understand her concerns and explain to her why you think this clinical decision is the best decision possible. Bear in mind, a lot of patients will be coming in with a lot of misconceptions when it comes to dental treatment, and unfortunately there is some distrust when it comes to dentist and patient relations. So you need to take this into consideration and act professionally and ensure that you address all of the mother's concerns. Do not be offended by the fact that she thinks you're scamming her. Just understand that maybe she's just had a bad experience in the past, and you just need to get past this and explain why you're different and why you're trying to do the best for her child. The next thing I say is to make sure you don't belittle the mother's concerns. Bear in mind that at the end of the day, the mother takes the final decision and she has autonomy over the decision of the treatment. This is one of those 4 ethical principles that I mentioned, and it's important to note it here. It's important to know that you shouldn't be trying to shoehorn in these medical ethics. However, when you have the chance to, you should definitely mention them in your answers. It's your job to educate the mother and explain to her your decisions rather than trying to attack her for her views. Being a caring and understanding dentist will get you further in life than being one that's very abrupt and too cocky and thinks they know everything. And with regards to an interview, when you show that you have empathy and understanding of the patient's concerns, it's a plus point. After addressing the mother's concerns and understanding why she's upset, I would then go into all the different treatment options. So firstly, I'd mention why I think the fillings are the best option for her child, and then if she still disagrees with them after me trying to explain and validate them, I will give her the other treatment options available. For example, I could mention that the teeth could be extracted, or I could say that we can do absolutely nothing. Now, you may think it's a bit odd for me to say that a clinical decision is to do absolutely nothing. However, it is completely fine to write in your clinical notes that the patient said they want you to do nothing. This is because we need to take into account autonomy. And if the patient decides they want to do nothing, you have to respect this decision and move on. As long as you write it in your clinical notes and you have tried to explain all the different treatment options to the patient, it's completely fine to say this. However, one thing you can do is explain to the patient what the long-term effects of taking the decision could be. Bear in mind that even though you may have the knowledge and understanding of all the processes that happen in the patient's mouth, it doesn't mean that they agree with everything that you say. And if after all you're explaining they still don't agree with what you say, you just have to take their decision as final. You may be wondering right now, why have I not asked anything to the actual patient? Why is everything going to the mother? Well, this is because the patient is very young and only 7 years old. This means that we'd actually receive consent from the mother, parent, or from a legal guardian. You cannot gain informed consent from a 7-year-old child. There is something called Gillick's competence, however, it's not really relevant here because the child is so young. Just to give a quick overview, Gillick's competence assesses many different factors like a child's maturity and understanding of their disease on whether or not they can make a decision about their treatment. But because this child is so young, we're going to make the assumption that this Gillick's competence test has not been passed. If you want to learn more about Gillick's competence, I'll put a link down in the description where you can get some more information. So as I said, the reason why I'm going through the mother is because the child is too young to be giving informed consent, so I need to get the consent from the legal guardian, who is in this case the parent. So that is how I would structure the question. Just to give you a quick summary of what I said. So the first thing I would do is try and assess the mother's concerns and rectify any concerns she may have or any, misconceptions she may have about dentistry or the treatment you're providing. The second thing I would do is explain the actual treatment itself and explain why I've taken that clinical decision. The third thing I would do is mention any other treatment options and the long-term consequences. And the last thing is that I understand the mother is the person that takes the final decision, and it is within her autonomy to say whether or not her child should get treatment or not. So that's how I would answer that question. I hope the top tips were useful and that the example made sense, and the explanation of how I would answer it made sense. If you have any questions or things that you don't understand, please write it down in the comments box down below. And if there are any specific interview questions you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments down below as well. And leave me any feedback so I know what I should improve or change. I hope this was useful for you guys. And if you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell because it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching the video and have a good day.